It was a quiet Tuesday evening when Marcus Johnson drove through the small town of Riverdale. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple as he headed home after visiting his daughter in the neighboring city. At 58 years old, Marcus had the calm confidence of a man who had seen much in life. His salt and pepper hair and the gentle lines around his eyes told stories of his 25 years in the Secret Service, protecting 3 different presidents before his retirement 2 years ago. Marcus noticed the police cruiser behind him almost immediately. Years of training had made him constantly aware of his surroundings. He checked his speed, exactly at the limit, and made sure his turn signal was on as he changed lanes. There was no reason to be pulled over, yet the flashing lights came on anyway. With a sigh, Marcus pulled to the side of the road. He had been through this before, too many times to count. He placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen and waited. Officer Brian Dawson approached the car with stiff movements, his hand resting on his holster. He was young, maybe early 30s, with a rigid jaw and cold eyes that surveyed Marcus with immediate suspicion. "License and registration," Officer Dawson said sharply, not bothering with any greeting. "Good evening, officer," Marcus replied in a calm, respectful tone. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" The officer's face hardened. "I said license and registration. Now." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll need to reach for my wallet. It's in my back pocket." "Just do it slowly," Dawson snapped, his hand tightening on his holster. Marcus moved with deliberate care, retrieving his wallet and the car registration from the glove compartment. As he handed them over, he noticed Officer Dawson's eyes narrow at his driver's license. "You're a long way from home, Mr. Johnson," Dawson said, emphasizing his name with a hint of disbelief. "What brings you to Riverdale?" "I was visiting my daughter, sir. She lives in West Point. I'm on my way back home now." Officer Dawson looked into the car, shining his flashlight across the empty seats. "And what's in the trunk?" Marcus blinked, surprised by the question. "Just a suitcase with my clothes and some gifts my daughter gave me." "Step out of the vehicle, please." "Officer, I don't understand." "Step out of the vehicle now." Dawson's voice rose, his hand now fully gripping his weapon. Marcus knew better than to argue. He slowly opened the door and stepped out, standing tall but non-threatening. At 6 feet, he was slightly taller than Dawson, but he kept his posture relaxed. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Dawson ordered. "Officer, I believe I have the right to know why I'm being detained," Marcus said evenly. "We've had reports of drug trafficking on this route. Your vehicle matches a description." Marcus knew this was false. His well-maintained but modest sedan could not possibly match any specific description that would warrant this treatment. But he complied, turning to face his car and placing his hands on the roof. Officer Dawson roughly patted him down, checking all pockets and even removing Marcus's watch to examine it. "Sir, I'd like to inform you that I am a retired federal agent," Marcus said calmly as Dawson continued his search. "Secret Service." Dawson laughed. "Yeah, and I'm the FBI. Keep your lies to yourself." Before Marcus could respond, he felt cold metal around his wrists as handcuffs were snapped into place. "You're under arrest for suspicious behavior and possible possession of illegal substances," Dawson stated, his voice filled with unearned authority. As Marcus was led to the police car, he caught the eye of a young woman walking her dog across the street. She had stopped to watch, her phone now raised and recording the scene. Marcus gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. Little did Officer Dawson know that his actions were now being documented, and that the quiet, dignified man he was arresting had once stood between presidents and danger. The ride to the police station was short but tense. Marcus sat quietly in the back of the patrol car, his wrists uncomfortable in the tight handcuffs. Through the metal grill separating him from Officer Dawson, he could hear the policeman making calls, laughing about how he caught another one trying to pass through our town. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. In his long career with the Secret Service, he had faced dangerous situations across the world. He had protected presidents from real threats, analyzed security risks at major events, and even took a bullet in his shoulder during an attempted assassination 10 years ago. Yet here he was, handcuffed in the back of a police car in a small town, treated like a criminal for simply driving home. The police station was small but busy. When Officer Dawson pulled into the parking lot, he turned to look at Marcus with a smirk. Welcome to Riverdale Police Department. Hope you enjoy your stay. Inside, Marcus was led to a processing area where a tired-looking desk sergeant looked up from his computer. Got another one, Jim, Dawson said proudly. Suspicious behavior, possible drug possession. Vehicle needs to be searched. The sergeant, Jim, glanced at Marcus with mild interest. Name? Marcus Johnson. Dawson answered before Marcus could speak. I can answer for myself, Marcus said calmly. My name is Marcus Johnson. I'd like to make my phone call, please. Dawson snorted. All in good time. First, empty your pockets. Marcus complied, placing his wallet, keys, and phone on the desk. When the sergeant opened his wallet to check his ID, he paused at the sight of a small, worn card tucked behind his driver's license. Secret Service? Jim asked, raising an eyebrow. Retired, Marcus explained. I served for 25 years before retiring 2 years ago. Dawson laughed. Yeah, and I'm the Queen of England. Nice try. The sergeant looked uncertain. We should probably check this out, Brian. He's lying, Dawson insisted, his face reddening. These guys always have some story. Last week that guy claimed he was a surgeon. Remember? While they argued, Marcus noticed a bulletin board behind the desk with photos of police officers receiving awards. His eyes widened slightly when he recognized a familiar face in one of the pictures. Chief Robert Martinez, shaking hands with a senator. Marcus had worked with Martinez years ago during a presidential visit to the state. Is Chief Martinez still heading this department? Marcus asked calmly. Both officers looked at him with surprise. How do you know the chief? Jim asked. We worked together on President Gardner's visit to the State Convention Center in 2016. I was on the advance team. You'd remember me. Dawson's confident smile faltered for the first time. You're bluffing. Call him, Marcus suggested. Or you could check my credentials. My Secret Service ID number is 687423A. You can verify it with the federal database. Jim was already typing on his computer, looking increasingly uncomfortable as he read the information on his screen. Brian, can I talk to you for a minute? He said, gesturing to a corner of the room. As the two officers stepped away, Marcus took a deep breath. He knew his rights were being violated, but years of training had taught him to remain calm and think strategically. Making a scene would only escalate the situation. From where he sat, Marcus could hear bits of the heated conversation between the officers. Really was Secret Service. Doesn't matter, he was still acting suspicious. We can't just... Marcus's attention shifted when the front door of the station opened. A tall black woman in a crisp business suit walked in, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. It was his daughter, Lisa Johnson, who had somehow already found out about his arrest. A respected civil rights attorney, she scanned the room quickly until her eyes locked with her father's. The look they exchanged said everything. This wasn't just about one wrongful arrest anymore. The consequences of Officer Dawson's actions were about to become much bigger than anyone in the small police station could have imagined. The entire police station seemed to freeze when Lisa Johnson walked in. She moved with the confident stride of someone who had fought many battles in courtrooms and won most of them. I'm attorney Lisa Johnson, she announced clearly. I'm here for my father, Marcus Johnson, who has been wrongfully detained. Officer Dawson turned from his conversation with Jim, his face showing surprise and irritation. How did you even know he was here? We haven't processed him yet. Lisa held up her phone. Emergency alert system. Dad set it up years ago. If he doesn't check in after being stopped by police for more than 30 minutes, it sends me his exact location. She smiled thinly. Old Secret Service habits die hard. Sergeant Jim looked increasingly uncomfortable. Ms. Johnson, we're still verifying your father's identity and... His identity? Lisa raised an eyebrow. Have you run his credentials yet? Or were you too busy trying to find a way to justify this arrest? Before Jim could respond, the door to the back offices opened. A tall man with graying hair at his temples and the confident posture of someone used to authority walked in. His nameplate read Chief Robert Martinez. What's all this commotion about? Chief Martinez asked, looking around the room. His eyes landed on Marcus, still handcuffed, sitting quietly on the bench. For a moment, the chief looked confused. Then recognition dawned on his face. Marcus Johnson, he said, walking closer. Is that really you? A small smile appeared on Marcus's face. Hello, Robert. It's been a while. Chief Martinez looked stunned. Someone get those handcuffs off him right now, he ordered. Officer Dawson didn't move. Sir, I detained this man for suspicious behavior and... This man, Chief Martinez interrupted, saved the lives of a presidential candidate and possibly dozens of others when he spotted a disguised weapon at the State Convention Center years ago. I watched him tackle an armed man before anyone else even realized there was a threat. As Sergeant Jim hurried to remove Marcus's handcuffs, Chief Martinez turned to Dawson. My office. Now. Lisa moved to her father's side, checking him over. Are you okay, Dad? I'm fine, baby girl, Marcus assured her, rubbing his wrists. Just another day being black in America. 15 minutes later, Marcus and Lisa sat in Chief Martinez's office. The chief had just finished reviewing the dashboard camera footage from Officer Dawson's patrol car. I am deeply sorry for how you were treated, Marcus, Chief Martinez said, his face grim. This is not what our department stands for. Isn't it? Lisa challenged. This isn't just about my father. How many other black motorists has Officer Dawson stopped without cause? How many didn't have the advantage of being a former federal agent with connections? Chief Martinez looked troubled. That's a fair question. One I intend to answer by reviewing all of Officer Dawson's stops and arrests for the past year. Marcus leaned forward. Robert, I'm not interested in getting special treatment because of who I used to be. But this officer's behavior is dangerous, not just offensive. I agree, the chief nodded. Officer Dawson has been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation. Just then, there was a knock at the door. A young officer poked her head in, looking nervous. Sir, you might want to see this, she said, holding up a tablet. On the screen was a video already going viral on social media. It showed Marcus being handcuffed and placed in the police car, filmed by the woman walking her dog. The caption read, Innocent man arrested in Riverdale today with no explanation. Racism in our police force must end. #JusticeAforvo. Chief Martinez sighed heavily. And now we have a public relations crisis. No, Marcus said thoughtfully. What we have is an opportunity. This town has a chance to address something that's been happening in the shadows for too long. Lisa nodded in agreement. The question now is whether Riverdale Police Department wants to be part of the problem or part of the solution. As they discussed next steps, Marcus noticed Officer Dawson watching them through the glass wall of the office, his face a mixture of anger and fear as he realized the full impact of what he had done, and who he had done it to. The next morning, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, watching the news with a cup of coffee in his hand. The video of his arrest had spread across all social media platforms overnight. Local news stations were running the story as their headline, with reporters stationed outside the Riverdale Police Department. This is just the beginning, Lisa said, joining her father at the table. She had stayed overnight at his house, making phone calls until well past midnight. The department has received hundreds of calls already. Marcus nodded quietly. He wasn't someone who sought attention, having spent his career working in the background, protecting others while staying invisible himself. Now his face was on every screen in town. His phone rang, the third call from a news station that morning. He declined it again. You don't have to talk to them, Lisa reminded him, but your story could make a real difference. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang again. This time, it was Chief Martinez. Robert? Marcus answered. I assume things are busy at the station today. That's an understatement. Chief Martinez replied, sounding tired. Marcus, I've been reviewing Officer Dawson's record. It's worse than I thought. In the past year, he's pulled over 47 black drivers compared to only 12 white drivers. The arrest rates show the same pattern. Marcus wasn't surprised, and no one noticed this before. There was a pause. I should have. That's on me. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Lisa went to answer it while Marcus continued talking. What happens now, Robert? Internal Affairs is conducting a formal investigation, but I'd like your help with something else, Chief Martinez said. The mayor wants to hold a town hall meeting tomorrow night to address community concerns. Would you be willing to attend? Lisa returned with a folder in her hand. Dad, You need to see this. Marcus asked Chief Martinez to hold for a moment and took the folder. Inside were printed copies of emails from several Riverdale residents, people who had experienced similar treatment from Officer Dawson. Lisa had put out a call for stories on social media last night, and the response was overwhelming. Robert, Marcus said, returning to the call, I'll attend the town hall, but not just as the wronged former Secret Service agent. I need to represent everyone who's been through this but didn't have my connections. After ending the call, Marcus spent the morning reading through the stories people had shared. A 17-year-old boy stopped while walking home from basketball practice. A mother pulled over with her children in the car, made to wait in the heat while her vehicle was searched without consent. An elderly man harassed while sitting in his parked car outside his own home. By afternoon, Marcus and Lisa arrived at the police station for a scheduled meeting with the full investigative team. The crowd of protesters outside parted respectfully when they recognized Marcus from the video. Inside, a conference room had been set up with 6 people waiting. Chief Martinez, 2 internal affairs officers, the town's attorney, the mayor, and Officer Dawson himself. Dawson sat stiffly in his chair, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Thank you for coming, Mr. Johnson, Mayor Wilson said, standing to shake Marcus's hand. This situation has become a crisis for our town, and we want to address it properly. Marcus took a seat across from Officer Dawson, who finally looked up. Gone was the arrogance from the night before, replaced by a nervous uneasiness. Before we begin, Marcus said calmly, I want to make something clear. This isn't just about me, or what happened last night. This is about a pattern of behavior that has affected many people in this community. He placed the folder of stories on the table. These are just from the last 12 hours. People who saw the video and recognized their own experiences. People who didn't have a former police chief as a friend or a daughter who's an attorney. The mayor picked up the folder, her expression growing more concerned as she flipped through the pages. Officer Dawson, she finally said, do you have anything to say for yourself? Dawson shifted uncomfortably. I was just doing my job, enforcing the law. No, Marcus said firmly, looking directly at him. You were abusing your power. And now you'll face the consequences of that abuse, something your previous victims never got to see. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time, Officer Dawson seemed to understand the seriousness of his situation. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. at Riverdale Community Center. By 6:30, the large room was already packed with people. Local news cameras were set up at the back, and police officers stood along the walls, looking uncomfortable in the tense atmosphere. Marcus arrived with Lisa 15 minutes before the meeting was set to begin. They were immediately surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories or simply express support. Mr. Johnson, my son was stopped 3 times last month driving home from his night shift, one woman told him, gripping his hand tightly. Thank you for standing up. As Marcus made his way through the crowd, he noticed many people were wearing blue ribbons pinned to their shirts. This had explained that they had become a symbol of solidarity after a local church had started distributing them that morning. At the front of the room, a long table was set up with microphones. Mayor Wilson sat in the center, with Chief Martinez on one side and several town council members on the other. An empty chair waited for Marcus. Are you ready for this? Lisa asked as they approached the front. Marcus nodded. I protected presidents from physical threats. This is just protecting a community from a different kind of danger. The meeting began with Mayor Wilson addressing the crowd. She acknowledged the serious nature of the incident and promised a full investigation. When she introduced Marcus, the room erupted in applause. Marcus approached the microphone calmly. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but his years of training had prepared him to remain composed under pressure. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began. What happened to me 2 nights ago was wrong, but it wasn't unique. The only unique part was that I had the resources and connections to ensure it didn't end the way it has for too many others. He spoke for several minutes about his experiences, both as a black man who had faced discrimination and as a Secret Service agent who had worked with law enforcement across the country. I've seen policing at its best, he continued. I've stood shoulder to shoulder with officers who would give their lives to protect others, regardless of their race. What Officer Dawson did wasn't just wrong because I happened to be a retired federal agent. It was wrong because it violated the core principles of what police work should be. From the back of the room, a voice called out, "Where is Officer Dawson? Why isn't he here to face us?" Chief Martinez leaned into his microphone. "Officer Dawson is currently on administrative leave pending the completion of our investigation." Murmurs of dissatisfaction spread through the crowd. "That's not enough," someone shouted. "He should be fired." Others joined in, the meeting threatening to descend into chaos. Marcus raised his hands, and gradually the room quieted. "I understand your anger," he said. "But if we're going to create real change, we need more than just one officer losing his job. We need systematic reform." At that moment, the doors at the back of the room opened. Officer Dawson walked in, not in uniform but in civilian clothes. A collective gasp went through the crowd as he slowly made his way to the front. No one had expected him to show up. Even Chief Martinez looked surprised. Officer Dawson approached the microphone next to Marcus. His hands were visibly shaking. "I wasn't planning to come tonight," he began, his voice unsteady. "But after reviewing the evidence against me and reading the stories of people I've hurt." He paused, struggling to continue. "I realize now what I've done. I can't undo it, but I can face it." The room was completely silent as everyone watched this unexpected development. "Mr. Johnson," Dawson said, turning to Marcus, "I am deeply sorry for how I treated you, and to everyone else I've wronged while wearing the badge." His voice broke. "I'm sorry. I failed you and I failed what the badge is supposed to stand for." Marcus studied the man carefully. His Secret Service training had made him excellent at reading people, at detecting deception. What he saw in Dawson's face appeared to be genuine remorse. "Apologies are just the beginning," Marcus said, addressing both Dawson and the crowd. "Real change takes work. Are you willing to do that work, Officer Dawson?" The question hung in the air between them, a challenge not just to one officer, but to an entire system in need of transformation. Officer Dawson's voice trembled as he answered Marcus's challenge. "Yes, I am willing to do the work. Whatever it takes." A heavy silence filled the room. No one had expected this turn of events, least of all Marcus himself. He had come prepared for resistance, denials, or bureaucratic promises. Not a public admission of guilt and a commitment to change. Mayor Wilson seized the moment, stepping forward to the microphone. "This is an important start, but words must be followed by actions." She turned to face the crowd. "Tonight, I am announcing the formation of a civilian police oversight committee, and I'm asking Mr. Johnson to lead it." Surprised murmurs spread through the audience. Marcus hadn't been informed of this proposal beforehand. He glanced at Lisa, who nodded encouragingly. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said carefully, "but this committee needs to represent the entire community, not just one person's experience." Of course, the mayor agreed quickly. "We envision a diverse group of 7 community members. With your background in law enforcement and your personal experience, you would bring valuable perspective as chairperson." Before Marcus could respond, a young man stood up from the audience. "My name is Jamal Williams. Officer Dawson pulled me over 3 times last year for no reason. How do we know this committee won't just be for show?" It was a fair question. Too often, communities had seen promises of reform fade away once public attention moved on. Marcus addressed him directly. "Jamal, you're right to be skeptical. That's why this committee needs real power. Access to complaint records, input on policy changes, and regular public reporting." Chief Martinez shifted uncomfortably, but nodded in agreement. "The department will cooperate fully." As the discussion continued, Marcus noticed Officer Dawson still standing awkwardly at the side of the stage. The officer had taken a significant risk by showing up tonight. Whatever his past actions, this moment of accountability deserved acknowledgement. "Officer Dawson," Marcus called, gesturing him over. "Would you be willing to share with everyone what you've learned from this experience?" Dawson hesitated before stepping back to the microphone. His face was pale, but his voice grew steadier as he spoke. "I joined the force wanting to help people. Somewhere along the way, I started seeing threats instead of citizens. I let biases affect my judgment." He paused, looking directly at the audience. "I can't change what I've done, but I can help change the department moving forward." A middle-aged woman stood up from her seat. "My son was detained by you last summer. He missed a job interview because of it. How do you make that right?" Dawson had no easy answer. I can't. All I can do is acknowledge the harm I caused and work to ensure it doesn't happen to others. As more community members shared their stories, something unexpected began to happen. The anger in the room didn't disappear, but it transformed into something more productive, a collective determination to create change. By the end of the meeting, concrete plans had formed. The oversight committee would be established within 30 days. Body camera footage would be reviewed regularly. And a new community policing initiative would begin, with officers required to engage positively with residents. As people began to leave, Officer Dawson approached Marcus privately. "Mr. Johnson," he said quietly, "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I want to be part of the solution. I've requested to be included in any retraining programs the department develops." Marcus studied him carefully. "Redemption is possible, Officer Dawson, but it's earned through actions, not words." Dawson nodded soberly. "I understand. And thank you for giving me the chance to face what I've done." As Marcus left the community center with Lisa, he realized this was just the beginning of a longer journey, not just for Riverdale, but perhaps as a model for other communities facing similar challenges. 3 months after the town hall meeting, the Riverdale Community Center was again filled with people. This time, the atmosphere was different, less tense, more hopeful. Colorful charts stood on easels around the room, displaying statistics and progress reports. Marcus Johnson stood at the podium, now officially the chairperson of the Civilian Police Oversight Committee. Beside him sat the 6 other committee members, a diverse group including Jamal Williams, the young man who had questioned the committee's effectiveness that first night. "Thank you all for coming to our first quarterly report meeting," Marcus began. "We have made significant progress, but we still have much work ahead of us." The changes in Riverdale over the past 3 months have been remarkable. Every officer now wore body cameras that couldn't be turned off during interactions with the public. Complaint forms were available online, and the committee reviewed them weekly. Most importantly, a comprehensive retraining program had been implemented for all officers. In our first 90 days, Marcus continued, traffic stops are down by 30%, while actual arrests for serious crimes have increased by 15%. This suggests our officers are focusing their attention where it's truly needed, rather than on unnecessary stops. Chief Martinez nodded from his seat in the front row. The relationship between Marcus and the chief had evolved into a productive partnership, though not without occasional tension. Change never came easily to established institutions. "Now, I'd like to introduce someone who has been a key part of our retraining initiative," Marcus said, "Officer Brian Dawson." Dawson walked to the podium, looking noticeably different from the arrogant officer who had arrested Marcus. He had lost weight, and the hardness in his eyes had softened. He still wasn't wearing a police uniform. His future on the force remained undecided, but he carried himself with a new kind of dignity. "When I pulled over Mr. Johnson that night," Dawson began, "I thought I was just doing my job. What I've learned since then is that I was acting on biases I didn't even recognize in myself." He explained how he had been working with a psychologist to understand the roots of his prejudice, traced back to his upbringing in a small, all-white town and reinforced by certain aspects of police culture. "Now I work with new recruits," he continued. "I share my story as a warning of how power and bias can corrupt good intentions. It's not comfortable work, but it's necessary." Marcus watched Dawson closely. The former Secret Service agent had spent decades reading people, looking for potential threats. What he saw in Dawson now was genuine transformation, painful and incomplete, but real. After the presentations, Lisa Johnson approached her father with a news reporter who wanted an interview. "Your program is getting national attention," Lisa told him proudly. 3 other police departments have requested your training materials." Marcus smiled. "It's not my program. It belongs to everyone in this community who refused to let one incident fade away without creating real change." Later that evening, as Marcus walked to his car, he found Officer Dawson waiting for him in the parking lot. "Mr. Johnson," Dawson said nervously, "the review board makes their decision tomorrow about my future with the department." Marcus nodded. "I know." Whatever they decide, Dawson continued, "I want you to know that meeting you, as terrible as the circumstances were, changed my life. I was heading down a dangerous path and I couldn't even see it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Officer Dawson, When I was in the Secret Service, I learned something important. It's not our mistakes that define us, it's how we respond to them. He extended his hand, and Dawson shook it firmly. As Marcus drove home that night, he reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 3 months. What had begun as a traumatic experience had transformed into something powerful, a chance to create lasting change not just for himself, but for an entire community. The work wasn't finished, but Riverdale had become something he hadn't dared hope for, a model of what police reform could look like when a community came together with honesty, accountability, and a shared vision for justice. 1 year after Marcus Johnson's wrongful arrest, Riverdale had transformed in ways few could have imagined. The small town had become a national example of successful police reform, with journalists, law enforcement officials, and community activists regularly visiting to learn from what locals now called the Riverdale model. On a sunny Saturday morning, Marcus stood before a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Riverdale Community Justice Center. The modern building would house not only the Civilian Police Oversight Committee, but also mediation services, youth programs, and mental health resources for first responders. This center represents our commitment to true justice, Marcus told the gathered crowd. Not just punishment, but healing. Not just enforcement, but understanding. At 59 years old, Marcus had found an unexpected second career. After decades in the Secret Service working behind the scenes, he was now regularly invited to speak at police academies across the country. His unique perspective as both a law enforcement veteran and a victim of racial profiling gave his words special weight. In the front row of the audience sat Brian Dawson, now working as the department's community relations officer. The review board had ultimately allowed him to remain on the force, but with strict conditions, including ongoing psychological evaluation and a 2-year probationary period. Next to Dawson sat Jamal Williams, the young man who had challenged the committee's effectiveness at that first town hall meeting. Now a full-time employee at the Justice Center, Jamal coordinated a mentorship program pairing officers with local teenagers. After the ceremony, Chief Martinez approached Marcus with a folder in his hand. The latest numbers, Martinez said proudly. Complaints down 68% from last year, community satisfaction up 72%, and crime rates down across the board. Marcus nodded appreciatively, and the demographic disparities in traffic stops almost completely eliminated, Martinez confirmed. Not perfect yet, but we're getting there. As the crowd dispersed, Lisa Johnson joined her father, linking her arm through his. "Dad, I have some news," she said with a smile. "The governor called this morning. They want to establish similar oversight committees in every county in the state. They're asking you to lead the implementation team." Marcus raised his eyebrows in surprise. That would be a big commitment. "The biggest since you joined the Secret Service," Lisa agreed. "But think of the impact. What happened here in Riverdale could help communities across the entire state." Before Marcus could respond, Officer Dawson approached them hesitantly. "Mr. Johnson, do you have a moment?" he asked. Lisa squeezed her father's arm and stepped away to give them privacy. "I just wanted to thank you," Dawson said. "1 year ago, I was at the lowest point of my life, facing the consequences of my actions. You could have pushed for me to be fired, to be made an example of. Instead, you pushed for me to be better." Marcus studied the younger man's face. "And are you? Better?" Dawson nodded. "Every day is still a challenge. I have to constantly question my assumptions, my reactions. But yes, I'm a better officer and a better person than I was." "That's all any of us can do," Marcus said. "Keep working to be better than we were yesterday." As the sun set over Riverdale that evening, Marcus sat on his porch with a cup of tea, reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him here. The injustice he had faced had become a catalyst for change that now reached far beyond one man or one town. His phone buzzed with a text message from the governor's office, requesting a meeting next week to discuss the statewide initiative. Marcus smiled as he typed his response, accepting the invitation. In his years protecting presidents, Marcus had learned that sometimes the most significant changes came from unexpected moments of crisis. His wrongful arrest had been such a moment, painful and unjust, but ultimately transformative. As darkness fell over the town, Marcus could see Riverdale differently now, not just as a place where he had experienced discrimination, but as a community that had faced its flaws honestly and chosen to change. And in that transformation lay hope for other communities across the country, still struggling with the same difficult questions of justice, accountability, and redemption.